Before we get started, Brother Eric, will you do us a favor and say a prayer?
Dear Lord, Father, we're blessed to be here this evening. We're thankful that we have your word in front of us, that we can study it. We pray, Father, that we rightly divide it, and we pray that we can apply the things that we've learned today in this class in our lives. And we pray to be with us and keep us safe as we have the opportunity to do so.
Amen. So, the general epistle, the general letter of James here, one of the commentaries, right, says that it's for the most part, this epistle is a collection of independent sayings. But the viewpoint advocated about James here is that every portion of it fits beautifully and appropriately into the one theme of perfection. And James mentioned perfection in here many times, which ties every word of it into a collective, cohesive whole. When he talks about perfection meaning not perfection as we might think of it, but perfection meaning a whole part of your life. And so, excuse me? Completion, correct. Yeah. And so the theme was stated from the outset, and we'll read James here in a minute. In James 1 verse 4, it says, "Thus that you may be perfect and entire, lacking nothing." And so in this chapter, the following requirements for those who would be perfect are advocated. One, be joyful in trials, in ignorance and uncertainties. Let the Christian pray in faith without doubting. And then economic disparity, the rich and the poor alike are to rejoice at their new status in Christ. And also, God is not to be blamed for temptation, but the source of temptation must be recognized as lying within Christians themselves. And he talks about anger and wrath are not to be or to be suppressed. It is not hearing God's word but the hearing and doing of it that leads to perfection. And just talking to denomination people, sometimes especially the ones that believe in the faith only. It's amazing how they say they believe in the faith only, but then they'll go on to proclaim that they do such good works. And this is a way of showing their faith. And a young man, he was asking me about what type of outreach work in our community that we did here from Morris Road. And a lot of times to me, things become common to you. You don't really think about them. And so at the first day, I really didn't think about anything. And then I thought about it. I said, well, today I came back and I said, well, we have. I said, have you ever heard of Loaves and Fishes? And yeah, well, we have individuals go down there every Friday. I've been there myself, to help feed the homeless. And also, I, also worked with people from, at the time it was on Grove, and we did the Feed My Sheep, and we do a lot of what you call work. But, it's not a thing that I think any of us think about, because that's just part of our Christian walk, our life. We do things, pertaining to helping others without even thinking about it. And we shouldn't, as a way of, well, look what I did, I'm doing this, and it makes me look good or something. But it's just common thing that we do, and I think that's what we're going to find in James here is what he's talking about, because James gets into these individuals' life, and it's the same with us. And so the teaching of James can be likened to the book of Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, and to the teaching of Jesus, especially by his Sermon on the Mount. And the emphasis of James' letter is to stress the importance of good deeds in the life of every Christian or believer. And that's what I was talking about, in doing work. And that's just part of our Christian life, is to do work. And he talks about faith. The book of James, he talks about faith without work cannot be called faith. Faith without work is dead. And dead faith is worse than no faith at all. Faith must work. And it must produce. And it must be visible. Verbal faith is not enough. Mental faith is insufficient. Faith must be there, but it must be more. It must inspire action. And throughout this epistle to the Jewish believer, James integrates true faith and everyday practical experience by stressing that true faith must manifest itself in works of faith. And so, kind of with that, we go on to James. We talk about the author James, and like I said, Steve did the overview, so I'm not going to go deep into the James that we're talking about. But what James are we talking about here? Because we know there were 4 James in the book. In Jesus, 2 of them was in Jesus, in a circle of disciples. But there were also 4 James, and so which James are we basically talking about here as the author of this letter? Most commentaries, believe that it was Jesus' half brother James that wrote this letter. And so, do we know what date, approximately date that it was kind of written in? Okay, it went around 45 to around 49 AD. Before some of Paul's letters, you say? Okay. And so, James actually, doesn't become a believer until when? After the resurrection of Christ. All right? And so, James becomes a true believer, does he not? And what evidence do we have that James became a true believer? Okay. Yeah, he became a leader at the Church of Jerusalem. And so we know about that, and he presided over the Jewish council, and one of the and he mentioned about one of the ones that is waiting for the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. And where do we know that the book was written from? James wrote this book from. Possibly Jerusalem. Okay. All right. Well, and that's I think most would say it was written from Jerusalem. And so, in key words, what are some of the key words that if you read to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad.
Greetings. So he starts it out like it's a letter, doesn't he? And so he goes on to say, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Let the lowly brother glory in his exhortation, but the rich in his humiliation, because as a flower of the field he will pass away. For no sooner has the sun risen and with a burning heat than it withers the grass. It flowers, falls, and its beautiful appearance perishes. So the rich man will also fade away in his pursuit. Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say, when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desire and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be kind of first fruit of his creatures. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself and goes away and immediately forget what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continue in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does. If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceive his own heart, this one religion is useless. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit the orphans and widows in their troubles, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. James chapter 1. So James starts out by saying that he's a bondservant of God and of Jesus Christ. Bondservant meaning what? What does he mean, a bondservant?
A believer of Jesus Christ and who has confessed.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Well, bondservant carries the idea of a willing slave, someone who attaches himself to his master even when maybe he's been set free, someone who is very willing to do the service.
Okay. He's a bound to service without pay. So that's how he starts out. Not a half brother of Jesus, but a bondservant. And so he goes on into who's he writing this to? Is Brother Steve's always, kind of helped me in understanding, about about books in the Bible and stuff like this. I mean, is he writing this book to us, or who is he writing it to?
The 12 tribes.
Christians, I believe it's Christians in general, those that are dispersed.
Okay. Yeah, there are some that say that he was writing it to a Jewish audience, the Jews that were dispersed or exiled among the non-believers around Mediterranean and Asia. But as Steve was always saying, I believe, too, that he was writing this to Jewish and Gentiles Christians, all the Christians.
He's talking about spiritual Israel here.
Excuse me?
Literally spiritual Israel.
Spiritual Israel.
Yeah. Literally, there weren't 12 tribes anymore, and that's why they call them Jews, because there was only Judah left.
Okay. And so, James Reader, he's writing to these Christians, and he gets to verse 2, and he calls them my brethren. So, again, apparently, he knew these. He had a good relationship with these brethren. And what does he say to these brethren that are spread apart about their trials and tribulations? Because these Christians are suffering a serious hardship or persecution that's going on in their lives. And so, what does he say to these brothers about their what they're going through?
It's kind of joy because these trials you're going to, it's going to strengthen your faith and it's going to produce, my Bible says steadfastness, but it's going to anchor you in Christ Jesus.
Okay. So these Christians are undergoing severe trials, aren't they? And this is the very topic of the letter in chapter 1, verse 2. And there's a specific mention of temptation in verse 12. So James also indicate that, like I say, these readers are poor. They're poor, and they are being oppressed by who?
The wealthy.
The rich. And so what he says to them is that being people of faith does not exempt these Christians from falling into hardship, does it? That these readers, they were going to be, just because you're a Christian don't mean that, things are going to be easy anymore. They are suffering from serious trials and hardship. But Steve, man.
I did, but I kind of lost track of my thought. But considering these trials, I find it interesting that he says that there are trials that we're going to the New American Standard says encounter, and different translation might say that we fall into trials.
Okay.
And how is it that as Christians we fall into trials, or we encounter trials? Is this something that is just the nature of being a Christian is going to happen to us from time to time? Anybody that lives a godly life can expect, of course, to be tried in various ways, or to come under some sort of mistreatment or persecution.
Okay. But James he offers a kind of an abnormal response to hardship, doesn't he, or suffering. what does he say about falling into hardship and suffering? Count it as what? Count it as joy. And how can we do that? How can we count it as joy? Or how could they count it as joy? They were going through such, terrible persecution and trials. And he didn't say if, or he said, what did he say? When you fall into these trials, count it as joy. And being a Christian, like I said, doesn't exempt one from suffering persecution. The King James Version, I'm sorry, go ahead, Janet.
You said, how can they count it all joy? And I liken it to, this is a very loose example, to when you go to the gym and you're going through the stress of working out and sacrificing, but you're looking forward to the outcome of all that hard work. And this is the same way I feel for Christians. When you're going through all these trials, you know that you're building your perseverance and your faith and your hope in Christ, because you know that at the end there's this priceless gift for you if you endure.
Okay.
So that's why you count it as joy.
Okay, Brother Adam, I think, and Steve.
I certainly can see how you can take this as far as what you're saying about people suffering persecution, and as far as what Steve was saying, how can you just fall into these things? I think it also could be taken as these are just regular life, life occurrences,
Right.
Also, and we can count it joy, which is counterintuitive. Usually, why is this happening? Kind of thing, is what comes to our mind. But if we are testing our faith, that's what he says. So by the testing of our faith, it produces the steadfastness, this patience, this virtue that we're desiring by. And how we test our faith is, when we come into something, or we have a decision to make, or something happens, and we have to react to it. We, before we just react to it, or like he talks about later on, in anger or in wrath, we stop and we say, well, how can we bring glory to God by the next thing that comes out of my mouth, or by the next thing I do? That's that testing of the faith. That repetition, that practicing of the faith.
Okay. And did I see someone else? Okay. Sister Wendy?
It's also, I think, as Christians, and it comes with maturity and study, we have to have our thinking transformed from worldly thinking to spiritual thinking. Remember what Romans 12 says, therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living holy sacrifices acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. If we're not thinking of this world, these trials won't bring us into depression and sorrow, and because this world is just temporary. Our mind, our thinking will be on the spiritual.
Okay. Okay. Brother Zan and then Brother Steve. See? Go ahead.
All right. I also think that, and this is just to jump on the bandwagon with everyone else, when we talk about these trials and tribulations, it's not necessary. It could be not necessarily that you're getting persecuted, but you have to resist the flesh and the things of the flesh. And so this is a trial to you. Are you going to choose the spirit, or are you going to choose the flesh? And also, when we go through these trials and tribulations and we succeed, it is building on a solid foundation, because I'm not the same Christian that I was when I first obeyed the gospel, because of all the trials and tribulations and things that I've encountered. things that I hold fast to God. I'm a stronger Christian because of all those things.
Okay. Let's see.
I think we're all pointing in the same direction. It's about that spiritual development. And I don't think that it's any accident that right after verse 4, that verse 5 kicks in, talking about wisdom.
Okay.
And when you look at passages like in Acts chapter 5 in particular, that when Peter and the rest of the apostles, when they were miraculously released from this prison, that they went about and continued to preach Jesus, and they were arrested and they were brought in and tried. And it said that, and those that arrested them, they said, "We gave you strict orders not to continue teaching in His name, and yet you filled Jerusalem with your teaching and have intended to bring this man's blood upon us." But Peter and the apostles answered, "We must obey God rather than men." And because of that, they were beaten, they were flogged because of that. And in verse 41, it says that after this had happened, that they went on their way from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they had been considered worthy to suffer shame for His name. What an incredible mindset! This is as far as our spiritual goals concerning our obedience and what we ought to do and what's to be expected whenever we're obedient to Jesus Christ. We see these apostles that they went away rejoicing, and they considered it because they were persecuted. Okay. This is something that comes. It doesn't come naturally to us. Whenever we're mistreated, our first response for people that aren't spiritually developed is again, why is this happening to me? Or maybe a response would be, this is too much for me. I'm gonna give up and forsake the faith. But these apostles, they went away on their way rejoicing, and this is that joy that's being talked about there. Understanding what the end result of these things are going to be for us.
Right. And what he's talking about, is not that, James is not concerned that, whether these brethren will, suffer these trials or not. His concern is how they respond, and what manner they respond to these trials. And he says to count it as all joy means to consider, look at it as an opportunity for joy. And the important, it's important. It implies that a decision to respond positively, and not negatively, to these trials. And I remember Adam talking about in one of his classes about sharing your joy. And one think of well, how do you share your joy? And you share your joy by being joyful yourself, and all the negativity around these brethren. He's concerned about how they respond to it. Because James is a very, very example of someone who has suffered greatly, isn't he? The Jerusalem church, they suffered through famine and all kind of, being the first church, all kind of hardship, didn't they? And, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Obviously, there's all these big examples of hardships in the Bible.
Okay.
But I think it's also something that we should look at, that trials aren't always huge. It can be as little as, you're driving in a car and you spill coffee on your pants.
Okay.
I'm not saying you sit there and say, praise God, I just spilled coffee on my pants. But
You know, you gotta. That's something that you can use to test your faith. You know, you don't want to
Exactly.
throw out the first word that comes to mind, or get mad and mouth off at someone that's driving behind you or something. Trials come in big and little ways, all types of different ways. But I think it's just something that you need to look at everything, especially the small things, and test your faith. Use that as maybe a starting point. You know?
Okay. Yeah, and he says joy is always possible because what is it connected to? Joy? What is it connected to? He says in verse 3, what?
Patience.
Patience. What?
Perseverance.
Joy and faith. It's connected to faith. Joy and faith. But, you know, there's a connection between that. The joy and faith. And he says the testing of your faith, right? Produces what?
Steadfastness, perseverance.
Perseverance or endurance, right? So, I don't know, someone else had their hand up before I go on. But anyway, in verse 3 says, knowing that in God's hand, even the worst experience has the potential for good, doesn't it? And so the testing of our faith, James produces, he says, patience. And like tempering the steel, you know, it goes through a trial, but then, you know, it makes it stronger when it comes out. And so, here, you know, when you use patient, it actually mean it means steadfastness. And what does steadfastness mean?
Like you talking about in the song, I shall not be moved.
I should not be moved, okay? What? Refusal to give up, right? Refusal to give up. So, and then we move on to verses 5 through 8, and seek. Go ahead, Steve.
Before we get too far away from it, I was thinking a lot about these passages today, and the fact that, you know, where we get our endurance from. You know, sometimes when we're going through rough patches in our life, you know, we might even pray for endurance. We pray for patience. We pray for steadfastness. And then what happens? Things get worse. And then we wonder, well, what's happening here? Forgetting that it's that's what produces the endurance. You know, that's what produces the steadfastness. Not the removal of these trials, not the getting over these trials, but or just all these things taken away from us. You know, there's a difference between being strengthened through these things and having endurance produced for us. We just need to remember these things. If indeed, you know, we are praying for patience, we're praying for endurance, and things in our life get worse. It's passages like this that remind us it's that you know, maybe we don't understand what it is that we're praying for. If we're going to pray for endurance, you know, we might even be asking for more to be brought upon us that our character can be produced in this way.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, like I said, refusal to give up, refusal to, you know, stop trusting, you know, to stop trusting in God and His goodness. And I think it's also mean that, you know, I mean, you use, you know, certain hardship, you know, because what happens to people when, you know, when they're in a real hardship? For example, someone is locked up. What is the first thing that they usually you hear people turning to, or who they, you know, who do they turn to, or what do they turn to when they get locked up?
A lawyer.
A lawyer.
And then God.
You're locked up. Too late for a lawyer. But anyway, but you hear people about people turning to God. Now, it's like, God has their attention, or somebody has their attention. I'm in this hardship now, I turn to God. And I think that's just a case of an example of how we as Christians are, and is that, when you fall into that hardship, that's when you use it as a gift, from God, to put more, to trust God more. I think that has to happen. It has to be a thing that, my trust is still in God and His goodness. Go ahead, brother.
By the way, you asked for words earlier, important words and themes.
Okay.
This word in verse 4, fool, and also the word perfect.
Okay.
Come from that Greek term teleos, meaning completely attaining to, completely fool. And this is a common theme throughout the entire book. James pulls a lot from the Proverbs and he has kind of some modern first century proverbs or proverbial sayings throughout, but he also pulls from his brother's writings a lot. Matthew
From
5
Jesus,
through
right?
7, the Sermon on the Mount, which, by the way, in the Sermon on the Mount, where you see that flooded in here, Matthew 5:48, you be perfect, teleos, as I am perfect. We want to attain to this perfection. We do, like as mentioned earlier, Acts chapter 5. I'm also thinking about Acts chapter 4 too, where they take to the council afterwards. What is their prayer? They're told, I charge you not to speak in this name again. What is their prayer afterwards in Acts chapter 4? God, I pray that you will grant us the boldness to continue to speak in your name. They want to be made teleos. They want to be made completely full, attaining to this perfection, this fullness that Christ has already told them in Matthew 5:48 to attain to. The entire Sermon on the Mount is about attaining to this, the character, the key character of what it looks like to live in Christ. And that's exactly what James is pulling from and teaching here. You want to start out by attaining to this fullness, this perfection. Well, the first thing you do is overcome.
Right. And I forgot to mention, is that James, just like you said, James, being the half-brother of Jesus, and in this book, what we see is James is not, not teaching a new theological teaching. What he's drawing his experience from is his being with Christ. Christ's teaching, and we talk about the teaching on the Mount. Is that Christ's teaching, and he grew up under the book of Proverbs. So this is where he a lot of his experience is coming from, or his writing is coming from, is Christ teaching about the kingdom, and the book of Proverbs. And the book of Proverbs, is one of our wisdom books. Okay, go ahead.
I don't want to get too off topic or anything, but just going back to what was mentioned earlier, sometimes while we're in trials, I think it is a good idea to, kind of have thanks for those trials, because it is what builds up our endurance and our steadfastness. I think another thing sometimes another reason that, trials pop up is maybe it's a wake-up call. How many times do we, how many times do we go through life and, or how many days do we go through life just forgetting about God and not even sitting there and thinking about Him for 1 second. And then as soon as something pops up, we want to run to Him. And as soon as it's gone, go away, God, I don't need you right now. How many times does that happen to us? Or do we let that happen and we forget to give glory to God in everything that we do, not just when we need Him.
Right. Yeah. Again, I say It's trusting in God and His goodness, which bring us to, their whole life, which is perfection. What he talks about, Adam mentioned it, spiritual perfection. Trusting in, that's where it comes from. That's what it's talking about. When we are trusting in God and His goodness, it brings us to, the spiritual life of a spiritual wholeness, perfection. Okay, I thought I would get further than that tonight, but what about 5 more minutes? I'm sorry. But I guess just, like I said, this letter is written to the these Jewish Christians, but, what is the application that we can gain from it, and I think we've all talked about it a whole lot, about being spiritual, mature, and trusting in God, and when we are faced with trials and things, and that's what helps us in our lives. So one question, and then like I said, we're going to wrap it up. How should a Christian respond differently than a non-Christian to facing a trial, such as financial hardship or the loss of a loved one? How should a Christian respond differently than a non-Christian?
Well, I've always said, when people are talking about all the terrible things in the news or whatever, or what's going on in their lives, and just having a general negative outlook on things, I always try to say, I'm so glad I don't have to worry about any of those things. And it's like going back to what was said about Matthew 5 and following, the Beatitudes there is the blessedness that we can be blessed despite our circumstances. And I think that's how we can respond to people or respond to circumstances, because we know that no matter what happens in this life, good or bad, that we are still going to be rewarded, that we are still blessed. And so that's one way that we can have a different perspective. It doesn't matter what happens. We can, just like Job, that's what Job had. Job had, he blessed God in the good and in the bad.
And one thing, I just wanted to mention, just to give y'all a response to it is, like I said, what about in the loss of a loved one? I think Janet had her hand first, Mr. Steve. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Janet.
I would say the difference between a non-Christian and a Christian when you lose someone is to lean on God, because sometimes that loved one isn't a Christian, and we pray God he is, but if he isn't, regardless, we lean on God and we know that God is just, and he's not like man. He's gonna give everybody their just recompense. So I would say lean on God, trust in him, and like Joe said, blessed be the name of God.
Okay, anybody else? Sister, okay, I'm sorry.
I like to think how David acted when he lost his son. He didn't just mourn after the loss. He mourned before the loss. And after the loss, he went on with his life and in a normal way, knowing that he would see that child in eternity or loved one. Of course, I think you have to continue the same way as far as normalcy is concerned, whether it's losing a loved one in Christ or a loved one who's not in Christ.
Okay. Well, I mean, like I said, to me, you don't want to be, perceived as being too hard-hearted, over, a loss of someone's loved one, because, we understand that, those in Christ, that are faithful, where they're headed, but those who are not, but how do we you know, how do we kind of look at that and respond to it? You know, if we're asked, you know, I don't know. I'm just trying to say.
I'm just going to add one thing. We should thank God for the time we had that loved one
Okay.
with a thankful heart.
Do we think non-Christians respond the same way?
No, they don't. They don't thank God for anything.
Okay. Well, all right. Thank y'all for